You're listening to the Opioid Matrix, a journey into the rabbit hole, a Rigaku podcast, hosted by Michael Brown. This is an unfiltered conversation that examines how illicit narcotic trafficking is affecting every aspect of our society, including substance addiction, treatment programs, and law enforcement. Let's unpack the issue together.
Welcome to the Opioid Matrix. As Mexican cartels and domestic drug trafficking organizations continue to expand with the production and distribution of fentanyl across the homeland, it's going to take a whole-of-government approach combining both federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies to work together. One lesson we learned after 9/11 is that the law enforcement community must work together to save American lives. Now, Mexican cartel fentanyl is killing Americans in numbers that exceed 100,000, and there seems to be no end in sight to just how many more lives will be lost. So the question now is, what more can law enforcement do to mitigate the cartel threat and break out of the assigned law enforcement silos that may still be impacting our ability to do more? Now, to help answer that question, I've invited hazmat expert David DiGregorio to break down the silos and provide some insight to the matrix of mitigating effects to combat fentanyl. Now, David recently retired after spending 13 years in various careers, which included the U.S. Army, serving in the medical field, and his most recent appointment as the Director of Hazardous Material Emergency Response for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. He is currently a member of the BIDMC Harvard Medical School Disaster Medicine Fellowship. David also started the D2 Emergency Management Consulting to provide training, evaluation, and assessment services in the field of emergency response and management. David, first of all, thank you for your service to the country, and thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is my pleasure.
Now, I feel like I certainly have the right guy to talk to because you seem like you're qualified. You're an expert in the field of hazmat. Can you fill us in a little bit more? I know I left out a lot of your experience, but can you fill us a little bit more on some of your experience and how you came to your current position?
Sure. I actually spent 32 years in the military, but it was really the second half of my military career where I got into weapons of mass destruction, hazmat, that type of a thing. So it was the last probably 12 years of my career in the military that I really got involved with studying hazmat and, like I said, weapons of mass destruction. When I retired from the military in 2014, I worked as a military member. I worked with a civilian entity, Mass Hazmat. And when I retired, I was offered the position as deputy director, and 2 years later became director of the Massachusetts Hazmat Response Team. That involves 6 regional teams throughout Massachusetts, all of them set up the same way. But what we do is we respond to any type of a hazmat incident. And really in around 2016, that started involving drugs, and specifically fentanyl, in a big way.
Now you've mentioned, weapons of mass destruction. You have some experience in that. And of course, hazmat and all that involves, and now the narcotics, which is fentanyl. Now, when I hear the word hazmat, like many people think of fire, a fireman going to a situation, dealing with a hazmat situation. I don't think, weapons of mass destruction, of course, that's for the foreign affairs, but for domestically, I hear a fire truck, I think hazmat. Is there a silo effect happening with hazmat response? You mentioned the fentanyl crisis. Fentanyl to me is a narcotics hazmat situation. Do we need to rebrand what hazmat means today?
I think so. And I think that's what we started doing in Massachusetts. When we started really doing drug and narcotic response, there was a question, are we getting out of our lane as a hazmat team responding to drugs? And really what it came down to is because fentanyl was so worrisome to not just fire, but law enforcement and those others that were responding, they wanted to know what they were dealing with. So we were called more and more to be able to say, we have the technology and still do have the technology to be able to not just detect that it could be a narcotic specifically fentanyl or its analogs, but identify specifically which analog we were dealing with. And I think we were seen then as an asset for the state of Massachusetts because we really were the only entity in town with those specific technologies to be able to identify for whoever wanted that information.
And I remember when I worked with DEA, we had the methamphetamine clandestine response team, right? So if you found the laboratory and it was a meth lab, you would call in the experts to break it down. That was kind of a hazmat team.
Sure. But
I see that same threat, although the chemicals for making fentanyl are not as deadly as making methamphetamine, but certainly, if you're serving a search warrant and police come across 6 kilos or 20 kilos of fentanyl, or it's a fentanyl laboratory, that to me seems like, all right, stop everything we're doing. Let's call in David and his team to process and tell us what we're dealing with here.
Yeah, one of the things that very proud of the team that we developed is called our JHIRT, which is our Joint Hazard Incident Response Team. And that is a team that actually works hand in hand, literally, with the state police in order to go down and mitigate clandestine labs, whether they be due to energetics or explosives, or whether they be drugs. And we're seeing a lot more drug clandestine labs now than we are explosive. And really what that is making sure that we are the eyes and ears for law enforcement to be able to see or look at other hazards. Are there other precursors? Are there other things that could actually be an immediate danger for those that are responding? And then secondly, to be able to identify not just the fentanyl itself, but as you said, precursors, what type of a lab are we dealing with here and what potentially are they trying to make?
Because when we saw, heroin, Massachusetts does still have a significant heroin problem, transition to fentanyl. But if I look back on my career, heroin was the big thing. You really didn't need a hazmat team or specialty to go in to seize heroin. We knew what we were dealing with. But as the use of narcotics evolves, right, we see this evolution to now, I've talked to officers where they're only seeing fentanyl on the street. So it seems like we are behind in catching up to the trafficking evolution, right? We always hear law enforcement is 2 steps behind. It seems like now we're 10 steps behind.
I can't agree more. I think, a big part of this is the financial aspect. In other words, the drug dealers and the cartels, the money that's involved in this, it's not going away anytime soon. So each time that we come up with what we think is a solution to try to slow things down, something else is coming out. The many analogs of fentanyl. When we were actually being able to discover, okay, we're dealing with fentanyl here, there were other analogs that were being discovered with the hope that they were going to be undiscoverable by some of our technology. We've kind of got around that problem as well with different technologies that can identify not just the specific analog, but even the backbone of fentanyl itself to be able to see what we were dealing with. So I just think that we, as you said in the very beginning, if we're not working, there's a lot of different entities that are doing great work in this field, whether it be the medical field, even the medical examiner's office, whether it be law enforcement or fire and hazmat, you name the entity, they're doing great work. The issue is we're not communicating. So what I'm doing is not getting to law enforcement. What law enforcement is doing is not getting back to us. It's definitely not getting to the medical side of things to be, what do you need to be looking for? How we're not testing for fentanyl in hospitals right now is beyond me. It's a 75-cent test. But when we do an opioid screen, fentanyl isn't a part of it. And I think many people don't realize that. They're thinking if they do an opioid screen, they're testing for fentanyl. That's not the case in the vast majority of hospitals.
I was at a symposium, I think it was in Atlanta some months ago, where the drug czar, Dr. Gupta, took the stage and says, hey, I've got this great announcement. We've just identified fentanyl or xylazines and fentanyl. And many of the people in the crowd were like, well, that's been going on for the last 4 years. We as a law enforcement, public service community, urban administrators, there was no communication about xylazine. If we had a unit like yours, say attached to a DEA HIDA group or state and local task force, that information, hey, we're starting to see xylazine, it gets pushed to the city administrators. They put out a notice to the hospitals, to the service workers. Now we're on top. It just seems like a simple, like you said, a simple communication issue. But we were slow in the xylazine approach, and now we're seeing, Narcan has no effect if xylazine's mixed in with fentanyl. So we missed our opportunity, that window we had to decrease overdose deaths. Now we're seeing more overdose deaths as xylazine penetrates the fentanyl market.
And xylazine is just one of a family. So it's just, so it's not just the xylazine, just like it's just not the fentanyl. So when you talk about working with HIDA, that's one of the things that we're doing in Massachusetts is working with the HIDA team to be able to give them the information that we were seeing in the field, saying, hey, this is what we're finding. Prime example is we were seeing a certain analog of fentanyl in central Massachusetts. We weren't seeing it in eastern Massachusetts so much. But when we were getting the calls, we were passing that information off, and they were literally able to track where this specific analog of fentanyl was going with the cutting agent that it was involved in, to be able to say they were literally watching where this was traveling throughout the state.
It sounds like we need a special response unit specifically designed, basically what you were doing in Massachusetts, as a pilot that should be enacted all across the country, working with state and federal agencies, expand the concept of the HIDA group. So if I'm a DEA agent and I've got an informant who's telling me about a fentanyl distributor, I want you or someone on your team, part of that task force, to lead us through that process.
Yeah, it's one of the things that we started getting into, and there were some obstacles, and we're still trying to work through some of those obstacles. We were literally, as some of the teams, the HIDA teams, were going out and doing drug buys, we were actually testing in that same day. Matter of fact, within the hour, they would bring it back, we would test it, we were able to tell them exactly what they were getting. So that way they can go back to that drug dealer and say, hey, you sold me good stuff, versus, hey, you didn't sell me, the stuff that you were selling me really was nothing. You can't do that when the labs are 16 to 18 weeks behind. You can't go back 16 weeks later to a drug dealer and say, hey, you sold me crap.
Yeah, and as an undercover, I need to be able to test that within 30 seconds, 30 minutes, because I just let some money walk. Maybe I need to get that money back, or do I want to get a search warrant based on that analysis, that presumptive analysis?
That's right. And talking about some of these obstacles, even in my own, in Massachusetts, we've got to get together as a group of amongst a bunch of different agencies to say, okay, we all, as you said, have to work together. Even my supervisors were a little leery about hazmat getting involved with law enforcement. Is this really our lane? And, it was, although they gave us the opportunity to work with law enforcement to a degree, some of that was thwarted. Some of that was held off. And I think we could have been doing much, much better work with that freedom. And I get it. There's issues with the law. There's issues with other, and I'll be honest with you, egos, that type of a thing. But you know what? You have to get rid of that. You have to be able to work together. You mentioned that I'm working with the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center Disaster Medicine Fellowship. One of the things that they're trying to promote is an initiative called CREDO, which is a community-based reduction in drug overdose. And really what that entails is all of these groups, again, whether it be medical, law enforcement, DEA, HIDA, working together, communicating together, so we are all on the same sheet of music. Again, everyone's doing great work, but that work oftentimes is going for naught because many of us don't understand what everyone else is doing.
Well, that's why HIDA was created, right? The working task force. You have all the various government agencies there sitting in the same room. I've worked on a number of HIDA groups. So if I needed something from HSI, I go over to the HSI guy, hey, we need this, Customs, Secret Service, etc. I want to be able to walk over to your desk and say, David, we got this fentanyl situation. We need you. Let's go take a look at what we're doing. That seems like an easy fix to me.
It does. And as a matter of fact, we were meeting with our HIDA group probably at least once a month. We were meeting, going over the findings that we had seen that month, and I was talking to them more often than that. And that was an initiative that really just kind of started from two guys talking, myself and the gentleman that runs Hyder up here in New England. And why it was more of, why can't we do this? And that's not to sound flippant, but sometimes it's that whole adage of sometimes it's easier to ask forgiveness and permission. So we were kind of working together, and then as I spoke to my supervisors about it, again, they were leery, but they allowed it for a while.
Now, we talked about doing presumptive analysis tests when you're doing undercover or a CS buy. What type of equipment are you using, or should law enforcement be using to do this? Because I know when I used to do a lot of undercover, I bought some heroin from a Lebanese target. I was using the old marquee reagent test kits. You put a little bit of powder in, you break it. Well, it gave me a negative. So at that point, the supervisor said, let's go get our money back. Long story short, turns into a shootout. The guy had a gun. It was a mess. Went back to the office, retested it. It tested positive. That whole case was dismissed because we initiated it based on a bad test. What type of technology should officers be using in the field? Or if you're assigned to an undercover group and that sample comes back to you, what are you doing to test to see if that's a real product?
So I'll give you a somewhat long answer to a short question. So in my opinion, you can't have every entity buying thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars worth of equipment. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to have law enforcement buying the same equipment at hazmat, buying the same equipment as maybe potentially another hazmat team in the state. So what we've done in Massachusetts is hazmat. Under the Department of Fire Services, we buy the meters. So I'm buying meters like high pressure mass spec, gas chromatograph mass spectrometry, Raman technology, Fourier transfer infrared, otherwise known as FTIR, even colorimetrics like your little strips, your fentanyl strips. But hazmat has it all. So rather than each entity trying to buy all of this technology, again, why can't we work together where we send out a couple of guys from hazmat with law enforcement with those technologies to be able to do it? And that's where this whole idea of credo or working together comes, in my opinion, comes together, because no entity, whether it be a state or even local, wants to spend all that kind of money and be repeating that process throughout agencies.
That makes sense, because if you're a patrolman, you only see one or two canines. Of course, those canines are $20,000, $30,000. Not everybody can have a canine. And not every officer can carry in his trunk 5 or 6 different units to identify what a substance is. So you would need, each shift, you would need 1 or 2 guys in a truck to accompany or be on call, right? Makes sense to come to a traffic stop, to come to a search warrant, arrest scenario, whatever may be the situation, and let your guys do that work.
That's exactly what it is. We're an on-call staff. When we get that call, we send a couple of available techs out there. They've all been trained. We drill at least once a month, and they've all been trained extensively even before they get on the team. So they know how to use the technology. They have that technology to use. Again, it's a simple phone call.
Yeah, I was at one of the trade shows, and some of your guys were there, big crew, and you had all your equipment on the table. Must have been over $300,000 worth of equipment. So
I was just going to say that. So we call it a cat bag. It's a CBRN assessment team bag, and it used to be in a bag, and now it's in a Pelican case because the technology has. We've actually gotten more technology, but for that cat bag, it's about $300,000. Most agencies don't want to be spending that kind of money when. Again, if you've got an entity within your locale, whether it be state or local, and that can be called upon, it's just why duplicate efforts when and again, you've got law enforcement that they've got so many other things that they need to train on. This hazmat team, that's what they do.
So basically we need to redefine hazmat as a narcotics hazmat team, basically, and assign that. Are you working with other state agencies outside of Massachusetts as part of your D2 emergency management consulting to kind of get this pilot going?
So I am. So I'm actually, we've been teaching what we call, our team is called JHERT, but it's the same thing as a JHAT, which is Joint Hazard Assessment Team. And so we've been teaching JHAT classes to other states. There's a lot of states that are interested in that concept of having law enforcement working with fire, working with potentially even with military and FBI, putting those teams together, everyone responding. If you have something, a large scale event, you're going to have all those entities there. If you have representation from each of those entities, the scope may be similar. In other words, you're looking for any type of hazard, potential WMD. They're all looking for that, but everyone's coming from a different perspective. So you've got these four different, potentially even more different entities or different agencies trying to solve the same problem, but looking from different perspectives. The system works really, really well. We've been doing here in Massachusetts for as least as long as I've been on the hazmat team. The JHERT team here in Massachusetts was started back in 2009. And it really has just grown from there, from more of an explosives type of a team to really a drug and explosive team.
Now, looking back at your military experience, expert in weapons of mass destruction, during the Iraqi war or during the war in Syria, we saw but Assad dropping, I believe it was sarin gas, right? Weapon of mass destruction. Now we have cartel. Of course, sarin gas kills you immediately, right? Drop it, it aerosols and it kills you. So now we have the Mexican cartels producing fentanyl, which as an expert, has potential to kill you within 30 seconds. DEA says 6 out of every 10 pills is a lethal dose of at least 2 milligrams. Should we be looking at the top 5 cartels or anyone producing fentanyl as a narco-terrorist element because they are producing a product that can kill you almost as fast as sarin gas?
I believe so. I really do. I mean, this is one of the things that I believe wholeheartedly. As a matter of fact, I've spoken in Washington to congressional groups specifically about this. And I look at it in 2 different ways. One, what's going on in the streets. In other words, come to me and you tell me you name something else that's killing 100,000 people per year in this country. And I would say you're going to name that a weapon in some way. Substitute fentanyl with sarin. If somebody were passing out sarin around the streets, would that not be a terrorist event? Yes, it would. Fentanyl is just as dangerous. I say fentanyl is more dangerous. And the reason I say that is this. Sarin, anthrax, a radiological device, they're all dangerous and they all can kill. And I'm not denying that. As a matter of fact, I spent a good part of my career studying WMDs. That's what I did. But with fentanyl and its analogs, the difference is availability. I can't buy sarin, I can't buy Solman, I can't buy anthrax, and I can't buy cesium online. I can't go on the dark web and have that product on my doorstep on Monday. I can do that with fentanyl or carfentanil. It's I've actually seen the ads on the dark web. It looks just like eBay. You can literally go in, you can purchase these products, and it's so crazy that some of the companies from China, for a couple of extra dollars, will guarantee. In other words, if it doesn't get to you, it's like it's insurance, and they'll guarantee the delivery. So I look at it in 2 different ways. What's going on in the streets, without a doubt, I think should be looked at as a potential terrorist type of an offense. But the other thing is, you have to remember what's going on in the streets, as dangerous as it is, and as we talked about, that 100,000 people per year, that's being cut. That's cut. So the fentanyl that you're seeing in the street or its analogs is being cut with lactose or inositol or mannitol, a number of different relatively benign products. And the fentanyl itself is only about 3 to 5, maybe 7%. 7% for the most part is going to kill. Even 5% for the most part is going to kill. So it's already killing people in the streets. Think about if that were used pure. If somebody were to use that product pure as a weapon, and we could go further into that if you like, but I mean, if you look at it in both of those ways, it is a scary, scary product.
Yeah, you're right. You don't have, and these aren't trained cooks. These are people put a pinch of this, a pinch of that. A bad batch. Remember back in the 70s and 80s, we had bad batches of heroin that just killed people right off the bat. But then the traffickers were like, let's get it off the street. We don't want a bad reputation. Now it's like, these people are just test rats for a new narco experiment that's putting lots of money into the coffers. But here's the political rub. You say narco-terrorism, we should dedicate the cartels as a higher level criminal organization. But many states, such as Minneapolis, Colorado, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., California, progressive harm reduction policies are saying no, fentanyl can be made safe to use through monitored injection sites, through open air drug trafficking markets such as Kensington or the Tenderloin area, that these people in substance addiction are victims. We're not telling them not to use fentanyl, but we're going to help them manage the use of fentanyl. So we have two political parties in our country, one saying drugs are bad, they kill you, cartels should be narco-terrorists, but the other is saying no. Drug addiction is the wave of the future. There is no solution, so we have to learn how to manage it and live with it.
But what does that mean? I mean, so, you talk about a safe fentanyl. People are still going to go to the streets for their fentanyl. And as you said, the whole idea is this, if you think about big pharmacology, they spend millions and millions, billions of dollars making sure that the Tylenol that you take today is the same dose as the Tylenol that you take tomorrow and same dose as the Tylenol you take a year from now. As you said, with these drug dealers, they're just mixing it. If you're lucky, they're mixing it with an electric mixer, oftentimes by hand. So with a Tylenol or any other type of a controlled medication, it's called a homogeneous mix. In other words, that mix of that pill is going to be the same. There is no homogeneous mix with drug dealers. So basically what you're getting is you may get a pill with nearly nothing in it, or you may get a pill that is way past the lethal dose. And that's what we're seeing in the streets. As a matter of fact, when we do testing, you can take a fentanyl test strip and you can rub it on a pill. And if you rub it on one side of the pill, you may get zero. It may be negative. But it's because it's not mixed that way. So when we test it, what we do is we break up that pill and we put it into a solution or a dilution, and then we test it that way to be able to see if there's fentanyl there.
Yeah, even with Raman spectroscopy, if you don't get that laser on that precise pinpoint, you could be millimeters off and say, oh, it's a good pill. And you know what? You take it and you die. Which is really, that's a problem. We don't have a way to really test this stuff before you take it.
That's why we test a product. Usually we'll go 3 to 4 different tests. So in other words, if I'm using Raman technology, which we use extensively, we'll shoot it in one area of that pile. We'll shoot it in another area of that pile. Usually 3 to 4 times we'll shoot that pile to say it's a negative.
So there's really no safe, and I hate using the word safe drug use. I mean, when people were using heroin, right? Heroin usage could take you maybe 10 to 15 years to die of severe other health issues associated with heroin usage. Harm reduction, there was a space to work with that individual. You could make heroin use safer by giving out needles, reducing HIV, hepatitis, etc. Heroin use is still dangerous, but it was less dangerous, perhaps with some of those mitigating efforts. Now we're dealing with a substance, regardless if you're using a clean needle or dirty needle, there's a high probability you're going to die just on the facts that you just said. So do we need to look more at progressive harm reduction policies? Because as a law enforcement officer, if we're saying drug use can be safe and we're allowing it to happen, such as in Kensington or the Tenderloin, don't the cartels profit from this?
Sure. I mean, why wouldn't they? In other words, you're basically just feeding into what they're trying to do. They're trying to sell a product. You're basically putting a rubber stamp on that product. Yes, you're trying to make it quote unquote safe, but you're putting a rubber stamp on what they're trying to do. So, look, I think, is there a space to be able to help those that are addicted? Absolutely, without a doubt. I mean, it's something that we have to do. That has to be part of the whole solution. But to be able to say that, hey, it's okay, and we're going to help you do this safely, I don't think it's possible. I really don't. I don't think that approach is. Honestly, it's not doable.
And I'm not an expert in harm reduction or drug prevention to the extent where I can comment medically on these procedures. But certainly as a law enforcement officer or former law enforcement officer, I don't like anything that's going to empower the cartels to make more money, to produce more fentanyl, to kill more people. And we look at the legalization of marijuana. Oh, it's going to reduce the necessity for black market marijuana. The cartels are producing more marijuana than ever before and pumping it into the United States.
Yeah, there's just more of it on the streets. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. We legalized marijuana here in Massachusetts, and one of the big things that we're seeing now is the illegal grow houses. We're seeing them everywhere. We're seeing them all over the state.
I've even seen that the cartels are now buying front companies to set up marijuana distribution.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I don't know, but I mean, it doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me at all.
And then we look at the Chinese money laundering, mirror transactions, millions of dollars never leave the country, but somehow wind up in the Mexican coffers. The border situation, human trafficking. I heard the cartels are making $10,000, $5,000 to $10,000 per person they smuggle across the border. So when you add up the hundreds of millions of dollars in cross-border smuggling, sex trafficking, marijuana, and now fentanyl, you're talking about $1 billion industry.
Oh, without a doubt. And that's why, one of the things I've done several presentations on fentanyl and its analogs. And one of the things I talked about is, as I said earlier, the reason that this is going nowhere is the incredible amount of money. One of the things that when I was doing my research, I looked up, and as a matter of fact, after speaking with you, it used to be about $5,000, $6,000, even $7,000 for a kilo of fentanyl. Now, we're just talking, you've heard even $1,500. Take that $1,500 of pure, now you're talking 98, 99% fentanyl, pure fentanyl. And now I'm going to cut it with some type of a benign cutting agent and spread that around. That $1,500 investment, plus you're going to need a pill making machine or a pill press, that's probably $1,200 to $1,300 for a nice one that can make hundreds of pills per hour. That $5,000 to $6,000 investment, say, it could potentially, you're looking at $1.2 to $1.9 million. If you actually, extrapolate that out per pill, what you can sell, this is not going away anytime quick. It's big business.
I saw this when I did 2 years in Myanmar, and, Myanmar is one of the largest producers of methamphetamine in the world. And they produce a pill called Yaba, which is basically a methamphetamine pill. So as the cartels over there decreased the production and manufacturing of heroin because of the synthetic methamphetamine, they started just giving farmers pill presses. And here's a pile of methamphetamine. And these farmers were putting out 1,000 pills a day times 1,000 farmers. We were making seizures 100,000 pills, 1 million pills, 2 million pills. Each seizure was larger. Record-breaking seizure. Next week it'd be 3 million pills. And it's moving all across Southeast Asia. And of course, given the situation in Myanmar, it's very difficult to effect any mitigating efforts on that. But when I look at that pill pressing model and I overlay it on Mexico's 5 plus additional 10 cartels, thousands of people transitioning from the heroin production market, which is slowly being decreased, into the synthetic market, you could have a workforce of 100 to 200,000 people.
Why would it stop? There's really no.
Why would it stop?
It does. There's no reason for it. It just basically, as you said, fentanyl has filled that vacuum that was left by heroin. There's no reason for it to stop. There's got to be. The expression, you keep on doing the same thing over and over again, and they call that insanity. Well, we're doing the same thing over and over again as far as our drug policies to try to stop this. There's got to you've got to get and I'm sure I would hope they are, but a group of smart people together to say, and when I say smart people, it's not just scientists, it's not just medical people. Get the people also in the field together and say, hey, look, we need to think out of the box here. How do we as we were talking about, getting these teams working together, how can we actually make a dent into what's going on right now? Because we're not. It's getting worse from year to year to year.
When we look at, obviously this problem is multi-pronged. We look at what you and I did at the very ground level, trying to make the cases, trying to make the arrest. For every guy we arrest, there's another 10 guys we have to go investigate. Then we look at the bilateral relationship. I worked overseas with DEA. It's all about the bilateral relationship. What is the relationship with America and China? What is the relationship with America and Mexico? And I would say those relationships are worse now than ever before. The Chinese have no interest in supporting the reduction of precursor chemicals. The Mexicans have no interest in working with the Chinese to reduce the production of precursor chemicals. It's almost a willful blindness, or just a willfulness now to let it happen. I was watching the news today. The Russians and the Chinese have their destroyers, 12 ships outside of international waters near Anchorage, Alaska. So obviously the U.S. concern is at a much higher strategic threat level than worrying about narcotics. Narcotics may be at the very, very, very bottom of that list, if it's even on that 2+5 list at all. North Korea, terrorism, Iran, Russia, China. It's not on that list. So really, the U.S. military, the intelligence communities, like narcotics is not a national strategic threat. But from everything you're saying, it is. So what is the next step forward? What can we do as a military officer? If you were as a military officer looking at this internally, how do we fortify our internal position? Because obviously we can't affect the strategic bilateral relationship. We're on our own in this sense. Sorry to cut you off.
No, just what you just said. That's exactly what I was going to say is, first thing is you have to identify it as a threat. And I think there's still many out there that don't see it. So I think there's a huge education piece, not just I'm trying to do what I can to educate our politicians because they're the ones that are making the decisions. So, and believe me, there's many of them that don't understand the extent of the problem. But secondly is we can't, although I think we need to continue to try to work with the governments of Mexico and China and others, we can't be dependent on that. In other words, we have to take matters into our own hands and come up with solutions that we can use here in the U.S., whether we have their cooperation or not. And I know that's difficult. We're getting into politics and we're trying to keep people happy for many, many reasons. But again, name something that's killing 100,000 people per year in their countries. If that's the first question, if I were a politician and I'm talking to another nation, I would actually say to them, what is it that's killing this many people in your country, and what are you doing about it? India with malaria, and that becomes the focus of that country. Give me another country with these issues. That becomes the focus. This needs to become a focus in this country.
I look at how we handled COVID. It was all stops out, Operation Warp Speed. The government was actually telling people, you're going to lose your job if you don't get a shot. You got to close your bid. It was a totalitarian movement to end or at least reduce the probability of spreading COVID. And I understand, if you need to get a shot, you don't want to get a shot, you call for me, maybe I get it. But we're still looking at the same type of crisis, which is taking hundreds of thousands of lives. Last estimates I heard, between 250 and 300 people today will die from fentanyl-related overdose. That's incredible. But yet I don't see the same effort we put into COVID into the opioid crisis. And you mentioned politics. I'm the last person to talk about politics. But it seems that you can't get around the political question because that seems to be where the stovepipe is.
Without a doubt. There are many political issues that are involved with the whole fentanyl response. When I was talking to some of the congressional, some of the staffers, as well as actually some of the Congress people, one of the things that they brought up was the hesitancy to come harder with some of the penalties for dealing fentanyl because of the disparity or inequity of how we're arresting populations. In other words, the concern was that there were more black and brown people that were being put in jail for drug use or even drug dealing than there were for whites. And they were highly sensitive to that. Okay, I get it. And it's something that we need to deal with. But you can't use it as an excuse not to do anything. And I think, in my opinion, it's inactivity that's killing these people right now.
Well, man, you just hit the major buzzword right there: inequity, color. It's a conversation no one wants to have, David. Even myself, as an African American, it's very difficult to have those conversations. You know, I worked in Detroit, which was an all-black city, one of the highest murder rates in the country in 1990s, crack cocaine, and the argument was, well, you're arresting too many black people in Detroit. Well, so it's an all-black city. Who else is distributing crack cocaine? And, you know, it's not. You know, I don't want to get into the whole race issue because then it gets very, very sticky. But I think you made an excellent point. The term equity and inclusions are being thrown around. And if you happen to mention something like you did, you could be called a racist. You could be saying, hey, you just want to target ethnic groups, right? When we ignore the violence we see in South Side of Chicago, 25 people shot last weekend. An 8-year-old girl was shot, unrelated to drug trafficking, but 25 people shot. New York, D.C., has some of the highest murder rates, carjackings, violence in the country. And it's all included or condemned to a very small ethnic group within the city. So I don't know how we can avoid the equity question and have a law enforcement strategy that's going to be effective. There's just too many things blocking our way. And I have yet to hear any Democratic nominee talk about the fentanyl issue.
To be honest with you, I don't think there's enough talk on either side. I mean, you're hearing it. I mean, and you see, you know what? You may see something on the news saying that there was a fentanyl bust, or I mean, recently it came out in the news that the White House just came out with their xylazine/fentanyl protocols, and which is great. That's fine, but as you said earlier, how is this not something that we're looking at? Like COVID. I mean, this is an epidemic without a doubt. I mean, again, I keep on going back to what else is killing nearly 100,000 people. I mean, you know, it's if we're not doing anything about this, which I don't feel like we're doing enough, it's, you know, and this, controversial or not, there's blood on our hands. In other words, we're not doing, as leaders, I don't believe we're doing everything that we could to at least try to stem this. We're not going to stop this. I mean, that's you know, that's fairy tale. But how do we come up with different policies and different methods to at least slow things down or stem things or make it more difficult or more not so attractive for those that are in this business right now?
You know, crime has been with us since, you know, Cain killed his brother Abel, and it's going to be with us till the end of days. But we as a society have always worked towards mitigating and controlling crime so it didn't control society. We understand that there will be a certain level of criminal activity, but it won't overwhelm society or threaten society. We, at least in American culture, seem to have given up on that concept and just accepted, we've almost normalized crime. I mean, if you look at the new legislation for shoplifting, it used to be you have to steal over $1,000 now. So they raised the limit, and now people steal under $1,000. But if you stop them, then you lose your job. So now we've basically said you can go in and steal as much as you want under $1,000, and nobody's going to do anything. So we seem to be legitimizing and normalizing criminal behavior as non-criminal behavior, which is only escalating the overall problem.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, we've become a society of, as you said, acceptance. And acceptance is good in many ways, but acceptance also is, it's allowing for those that want to take advantage of the system to take advantage of that system. And that's what we're seeing.
You know, we've only got a few minutes left. I want to touch quickly on, we mentioned xylazine, and I read the bill that's supposed to limit xylazine, but for me, it seems ineffective because I went online a week ago and I could have bought a kilo of xylazine from China for $100. Xylazine is a legal pharmaceutical veterinarian substance. You cannot control it. You cannot ban it Because as a drug trafficker, I can look under my sink and use anything to make something. We can't ban all secondary and dual purpose use chemicals. So where do we go from here? I mean, the internet, as you said, you can go on the internet, the dark web. I think some of the other apps you can get on your phone. I don't want to mention any names, of course, but some of the apps out there, you can go on there and have drugs delivered to your house like a food service. So not only are we dealing with unscrupulous individuals, but we're dealing with the internet age, which makes access very, very easy and very, very cheap. The odds seem overwhelming, Dave.
I think so. But my answer to that is we've done it before. So it's not the use of the product. It's the illicit use of the product. And I bring this up all the time, with Botox. We use Botox every day, and we use Botox every day legally, more oftentimes cosmetically, but it's also used many other ways in medicine. And that's fine, just like fentanyl is. It's when it's used illicitly, we need to increase the penalty for illicit use of these products. We use chlorine every day, but chlorine is considered a potential weapon. As you said, there are products under my sink or in my garage that I could use today to hurt somebody. But if not used illicitly, they're okay. They're fine.
I brings to mind what you just said, Oklahoma City bombing.
That's right.
Fertilizer. I can't go into a store and buy 4 tons of fertilizer without somebody saying, hold on a second, what are you going to use that fertilizer for? Right? It's heavily monitored now, and as an expert in weapons of mass destruction, as a potential explosive.
Look what they did with Sudafed.
Yeah.
They passed that law where somebody has to go behind the counter for you to get Sudafed for your head cold. I mean, it's those type of out-of-the-box type of actions that we need to make things more difficult. I mean, that's part of it.
I think in terms of the domestic diversion of xylazine, if you wanted to buy xylazine, you have to click, and when you buy it, we're going to notify DEA diversion that you're buying 2 bottles of xylazine. I guarantee you the U.S. diversion would stop overnight.
That's right. And you know what?
Something as simple as that.
State your reason why.
Why do you need it? Who are you using it for?
Exactly.
Right? Just like when you're buying a handgun.
That's right. That's right. I believe that there are answers to this. It's going to take time. It's going to take personnel, and it's going to take an effort to be able. In other words, there's got to be a want. There's got to be a want to do this.
No, I agree with you, Dave. But we're just about out of time. I want to thank Dave DiGregorio for coming on board. Dave, can you give us an email for your company if some of the listeners want to reach out to you? I suspect maybe police departments, health administrators, anyone who's looking at this fentanyl situation and saying, you know what, I need to talk to Dave about putting some mitigating efforts into our city policy.
Sure. You can reach me at, I'll give you my Gmail account, which is DiGreg63. That's Delta India Golf, Romeo Echo Golf 63 at gmail.com.
All right, Dave. Hey, it's been a pleasure. I mean, I could talk to you for hours about some of these issues, but I hope we've enlightened the audience a little bit to the extensive, expansive nature of the fentanyl crisis. This is just not about street dealers and users. It exceeds and goes to the highest political levels, bilateral relationships, foreign countries, and the potential weaponization of fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction. Again, I want to thank you, Dave, for coming on board. And I encourage our listeners to reach out to Dave if they have more questions and put something together, because we don't have time. People are dying, and this is going to require an immediate response. So thank you again.
And if anybody has good ideas, send them my way. I say that every time I speak. You know what? It takes a village.
Absolutely.
Rigaku Analytical Devices is a U.S.-based manufacturer of advanced analytical equipment for the identification of unknown substances. Utilizing Raman in our devices means we can non-destructively scan through packaging with a result of identification in less than 1 minute. Rigaku is committed to supporting and partnering with your agency to tackle this problem together. To learn more, visit rigakuanalytical.com. Thank you for joining host Michael Brown for this episode of the Opioid Matrix, a journey into the rabbit hole. or Rigaku podcast. Keep connected with us by subscribing to the show on your favorite podcast player. If you like what you've heard, please rate the show. No matter the controversy around the illegal drug supply chain, our mission is to save lives. Thanks for listening. Until next time.